Hey YouTube, it's Kel. I just thought I would pop on with a semi-quick video tonight as a follow-up to the video we did a couple days ago when we talked about the id, the ego, and the superego. So if you have not seen that one, you may want to go back and watch it just as a preface to this video. They are interrelated, but not exactly. So just as a kind of review for the other one, we basically talked about how Freud mentioned there's 3 different sides to your personality, and I'm summing it up really quick, but essentially one is kind of like the kid side of you that's pleasure oriented. One is like the parent side of you. So the id is the kid side of you. The parent side of you also have, which is like the super ego, and then you have the ego, which is kind of like the adult in you that's like trying to balance the kid and the parent. So in reality. So if you want to go watch that one, go ahead. It's going to kind of overlap, and it's what led me to do this one tonight. But basically, we're going to talk about something that I see all the time in therapy, which is called the overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic. So, and obviously, as you can imagine, you kind of think about it like this with your hands. And ideally, every relationship feels like you're 2 equals. You know, it might be a little fluid. You might do a give and take, but you want to ideally feel like, you know, you're 2 equals in a reciprocal, pretty equal relationship, right? Partner to partner. So that is, and you want to feel like, okay, we're both adults, you know, no one's trying to parent or control another person. And that would be like the ideal healthy relationship, right? So what happens a lot of times, you will see, is you end up in what is called an overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic, where it maybe started out, you know, briefly as like equals, but what happened is slowly, whether they, you know, people were subconsciously drawn to the underfunctioner, overfunctioner dynamic because of their childhood, or they just ended up having behaviors that kind of perpetuated the cycle. The overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic is like you can imagine. Essentially, you need a certain amount of functioning to work well as a team, right? If you are living with someone, loving someone, working with someone, whatever, you're going to function as a team. And what happens is if one person starts to either do less, well, we'll just say if one person starts to do less, they go into like an underfunctioning mode. What can happen a lot of times is the other person will pick up the slack and become an overfunctioner, okay? And so, or it could have started out the other way, where one person just kind of goes into a little bit of like overfunctioning mode, and it lets the other person slide into a, well, you know, they'll just do it. So then this person underfunctions, right? So now I'm going to, just for the sake of brevity, an example, and an easy example is like, okay, this is, and what it feels like in the relationship over time is it feels like you end up having a child-parent dynamic, which ends up affecting your sex life. You just, you know, both of you lose respect for the other person. You end up having resentment for the other person, both of you. So it's just a very good thing to, when you start to notice this, to nip it in the bud quickly, because you don't want to let it go too long, because it can lead to a lot of other problems. It's not just about the overfunctioning, underfunctioning. It ends up leading to a lot of resentment, a lot of like lack of attraction. So we'll get into it, but basically here's an example. Okay, so a lot of times if you know you eat dinner together, and then you have the dishes left over, right? Now sometimes you will have a person who is fine in the relationship waiting to do the dishes, and they don't necessarily need to get them done right away. Now, I'm going to give that person the benefit of the doubt that they would do the dishes. We're not talking about extreme examples where people would sit in like, you know, gross filth for a while. We're just talking about people who would say like, I'll get to it later, you know, and they're maybe like at the end of the night versus like right away. Now, that it kind of goes into like it's not that's not necessarily an underfunctioning stance, but what can happen is the other person who maybe has a discomfort with some kind of chaos or discomfort with not feeling like their environment is in control or, whatever, can go into overfunctioning mode. And what they'll say is, I'll just do it. That's the classic kind of, you're in an overfunctioning stance if your phrase is, I'll just do it, and what happens is, if you keep saying, I'll just do it, and the other person doesn't do it, that's when you're going to end up in this overfunctioning, underfunctioning relationship, right? So now you're going to ask yourself probably, what is the treatment for this? Like, how do we fix it, right? So the truth is really the overfunctioner has got to learn to tolerate more discomfort with things not being the way that they want them to be. So it's part of it is a control issue. And the overfunctioner kind of has to release control that it will be done when they want it to be done, and also be done sometimes the way they want it to be done. A lot of times overfunctioners will say, well, they're not going to do it right, so I'll just do it. It's like, well, you either kind of have another person do whatever you want, but it might just not be done as well or as perfectly as you want. Or if you do end up making that choice and you end up doing it, in my opinion as a therapist, that's your choice, but then you don't complain about it later. You can't make the conscious choice to do something and then complain about how you were a victim of having to do it, because no one made you do it, So that's part of the overfunctioner's treatment, is really releasing control of when and exactly how something is done, maybe tolerating a little bit more of discomfort in the timing and the environment. Now, again, I'm not talking about sitting in filth. I'm talking about maybe you wait, someone wants to wait a couple hours to do the dishes. This person has to get in touch with what is it in them that makes them need to have it done right away. What kind of, what do they tell themselves if it is a couple hours, Now, the underfunctioner has got to obviously start taking more accountability for underfunctioning in the relationship. And also, a lot of times what can happen is this underfunctioner may have had a controlling parent. So it may end up becoming like a power struggle between the two. Now, that's the subconscious thing going on, right? The conscious thing, up here you have the dishes, right? That's just the kind of up here content that's going on. But down here, what's really going on between the couple, the dance is going on, is a control/power struggle, of this person maybe not trusting that this person's going to do it. This person feels controlled by this person saying, well, you're telling me I have to do it right now, which feels like you're a parent and you're telling me when and how I have to do it, and I don't like being told what to do. So you have these underlying like rebelliousness issues that can happen down here with the underfunctioner, kind of saying, well, like they delay out of kind of like a passive aggressive, again, they're not meaning to do this, but maybe in the dance they had with their parent, if they just kind of waited it out, their parent would end up doing it and then just complain about it or whatever. So this person has maybe control issues of like, you're not going to tell me when, because that feels like you're bossing me around, So you basically, so a lot of it is clear communication. It has to be really firm boundaries on both sides. This overfunctioner has to really say, hey, if this is not done by X, then Y is going to happen, So, and get good at, instead of just doing it, because the doing it is the easy thing. And I'm going to give you an example. It's like if you see your toddler struggling to tie their shoes, right? You could just do it and tie their shoe for them, but you're not doing the hard work of sitting through the discomfort of watching them struggle and end up doing it themselves, where they learn how to do it, right? So yeah, you can just do it for them. That's like an overfunction or underfunction relationship. You can just do it for them, but nothing ultimately is going to change. And the overfunctioner is going to end up feeling resentful And they'll say things like, they never do anything, they don't do it right, or, you know, I just never feel like I have any help. When a lot of times the overfunctioner is making conscious choices to do things because they want it done in their specific way at their specific time. So there has to be a detachment of control on the overfunctioner side. And then again, there has to be increased accountability, and also the underfunctioner has to get in touch with, like, do they have control issues from their family of origin that they're kind of projecting onto their partner to kind of challenge them into like a power struggle. So there's a lot of dynamics there that's going on, but essentially at the end of the day, if you want a dance to stop, you know, if you and your partner have been doing a dance, you cannot change your partner's moves, right? You can only change your moves. So if you want to change the dance that you've been doing with your partner, just remember you cannot change their moves, but if you change your moves, then it will change the dance, because they will be forced to alter their steps and their moves because you're changing your moves, right? So, and everything in a relationship is like a dance. It's intimacy, the dance of intimacy. So, I just wanted to come on and throw that out there. Essentially, like, complaining will not do it, nagging your partner will not do it. You know, essentially, like, the overfunctioner has to stop overfunctioning, and essentially it should balance out as long as this person's willing to take accountability and get in touch with, like, why are they putting themselves into like a power struggle with their partner, you know? So, but either way, the constant overfunctioning is not going to fix it. This person can honestly a lot of times be in a codependent stance. They need to get in touch with treatment for that. And I have videos on that too. But so I hope that maybe this made sense to some people out there who find themselves in, you know, a little bit of that dynamic. And I hope you end up feeling like you are with an equal, and it just helps, you know, correct the dance that you were doing with your partner. And I wish you love and health and happiness tonight, and I will see you next time.